Okay, hello, and welcome to the second webinar on recognising and responding to deterioration in a person's mental state. My name is Andrew Moores. I'm the Principal Advisor in Mental Health at the Australian Commission on Safety and Quality in Healthcare. As we start, we would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which the Commission is based, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We pay our respects to their elders past and present and to their emerging leaders. We also pay our respects to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. The Commission also acknowledges the leadership of mental health consumers and carers who have brought their lived experience and teach us, and this work has led to improvements for everybody in the health system. And I was thinking this week, we'll just give a shout out to the Gaia Dewey Proud Spirit Declaration, which is a great place for people to look around the leadership from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander mental health. So let's get going. This is a webinar. There will be an opportunity to put some questions into the chat, which is on the right-hand side of your screen. And following all of the presentations, we will see how many questions we can get through. You are able also to send questions to the Commission at the end of the presentations. Quick thank you to our presenters last week, Emily and Jackie from Children's Hospital in Melbourne and John Foster from St Vincent's in Melbourne. The work has generated a lot of interest. So on to today. First, we'll start with Casey Fowler, who is a clinical nurse consultant for the Rapid Response System Coordination Unit at Children's Health Queensland. Casey has a background in paediatric intensive care and paediatric emergency. He's a firm believer that everyone should have access to high quality care and driven by the idea of getting it right for every child, every time. Casey, thank you for joining us.
Thanks very much, Andrew. Hopefully you're all seeing the right screen there.
It's just white at the moment, Casey. It's just blanked white.
Sorry, guys. Technology, I am not. There we go. Is that better?
Yep, that's perfect.
The Mental Health, Alcohol and Other Drugs branch in Queensland conducted a multi-incident analysis of suspected suicides. That data showed that of all people who died by suicide in 2015 and 2016, who had an admission within 1 month of their death, half of them were admitted to non-mental health facilities. Deterioration of a person's mental state is not purely a mental health issue. Good afternoon, good morning or good evening, wherever and whenever you're watching this webinar. My name's Casey, and as Andrew said, I'm a clinical nurse consultant at Children's Health Queensland. I'm the nursing lead for the Rapid Response System and heavily involved in the Standard 8 throughout Children's Health Queensland. Today, I'm going to show you the direction that we are taking, our journey so far from the initial work at Children's Health Queensland and our ideas for statewide consensus and our proposed next steps. The second edition of the NSQHS standards has brought the recognition and response to deterioration in a person's mental state to the fore. Children's Health Queensland, like a lot of facilities around the country, already has a high-functioning, robust and reliable approach to recognising and responding to physiologic deterioration. The second edition is challenging our same with the deterioration of a person's mental state. We have pockets of expert clinicians throughout our organisation, such areas as our Child and Youth Mental Health Service, who already have established pathways for the referral of young people needing an acute, to our Intensive Care Unit Liberation Group, whose focus on recognition and prevention of delirium in paediatric intensive care patients have saturated the staff with education. And now every PICU patient is assessed for delirium daily. To determine our compliance against the requirements of the standard, we conducted a gap analysis in January of 2019. The gap analysis highlighted the lack of national consensus on a few key points. The understanding of the nature, scale and consequences of failures to recognise and effectively respond to deterioration in mental state, a nationally agreed set of key adverse outcomes associated with that failure, a nationally agreed set of key markers indicative of deterioration of mental state that are both clinically useful and applicable to acute healthcare settings, and standardised tools that are validated for assessing and tracking deterioration in mental state. There's also no standardised management pathways and protocols for responding to deterioration in mental state in acute care settings that are inclusive of an integrated approach to physiologic deterioration and deterioration of a person's mental state. The gap analysis team at the same time also undertook a benchmarking exercise, and at the time of that report there was no specialty paediatric service that addressed this component of the standards. The team completed an extensive literature review to examine indicators for deterioration, looking specifically at indicators for delirium, aggression, deliberate self-harm, suicidal ideation, completed suicide, and all-cause mortality. In the absence of a national consensus, that working group made several recommendations. Children's Health Queensland should not develop or adopt a specific at that point in time, that an emphasis should be placed on the importance of the person's self-report and the input from families and carers that was highlighted in the Gaskin research review, and this is underpinned by Children's Health Queensland's commitment to person-centred care. Any future actions should build on the breadth and depth of actions already being implemented, and to consider the organisation's considerations outlined to enhance existing strategies and to address gaps, and to continue liaising with stakeholders and other services to advocate for a statewide and national approach. In alignment with these recommendations, 2 representatives from CHQ were present at the roundtable discussion hosted by the Australian Commission in June of 2019. This roundtable discussion's purpose was to report to participants on the background of the current scoping study and the findings of that study to date. This highlighted many of the same gaps as our internal gap analysis. No tool currently sets out objective criteria for tracking deterioration in a person's mental state equivalent to observation charts for physiologic deterioration. The scoping study also highlighted the difficulty in communicating the changes in mental state in a shared language in order to initiate an effective therapeutic response. Further, the scoping study has highlighted the emphasis on self-report and by extension in the paediatric workflow, the parent or carer report on changes in mental state and the considerable variation in the processes in place of various health service organisations. The result of the roundtable and scoping study was consensus that a clear and direct way forward did not yet exist. The Commission committed to further exploration regarding the modification of the escalation mapping tool, and a quick thank you to the Royal Children's Hospital team who outlined their experience in using the EMT in the last webinar. The first component for us of recognising and responding to deterioration of a person was the clear and concise definition of what comprised mental state. When first mentioned, a significant number of clinicians defaulted to a mental health frame. That is, a deterioration of a person's mental state would be due to a psychiatric condition needing specialist mental health practitioners. We went in search of a definition that is meaningful to all clinicians, not just those with specialist mental health training. Mental state for us is now broadly understood to refer to a person's intellectual capacity, emotional state, and general mental health. It comprises mood, behaviour, orientation, judgment, memory, problem-solving ability, and their contact with reality. All these characteristics can be readily tested and assessed with validated tools in the adult population. The same can't be said for the paediatric environment. Throughout the lifespan, the paediatric patient's physical function, cognitive function, social interaction, and emotional state are constantly changing and developing. Any definition of deterioration of a person's mental state should reflect changes to those 4 pillars: physical function, cognitive function, social interaction, and emotional state from the person's documented baseline and developmental milestones. Deterioration is defined as the process of becoming progressively worse. This nuanced expression gears the clinician towards a negative framework. Changes in a person's mental state is a term more readily utilised by mental health clinicians, and for us they are seen as interchangeable. Any changes in or deterioration of a person's mental state should result in some form of escalation. Expanding on our definition, we describe the brain as an organ. Like the lungs, when they're not functioning correctly, for whatever reason, bronchiolitis, COPD, trauma, or burns, we can see signs of that. We call it respiratory distress. We can see increased work of breathing, cyanosis, changes to breathing sounds and patterns. So too, the brain cannot function correctly, also for any number of reasons. Lack of coffee, children with autism spectrum disorders who are outside of their usual schedule and environment, medication effect or side effect, delirium, stroke, encephalopathy, mood disorders. We can see signs of cognitive distress. We can see agitation and aggression. We can see quiet and withdrawn, comatose, hallucinations and delusions. It's all a sign of deterioration of a person's mental state. We set out to create a form, and version 1 and 2, how do we document each child's normal? The short answer is we don't, at least not very well, and certainly not reliably. So our first goal was for a conversation between the patient, the parents and carers, and the clinicians around where their child was across those 4 pillars of physical function, cognitive function, social interaction, and emotional state. This is just one example. We align the forms to match the age ranges of our physiologic deterioration tool, the Children's Early Warning Tool, and this is an example from the 1 to 4-year-old chart. As you can see, there are some base questions, followed by some prompts aligned to developmental milestones to determine each child's baseline. Version 3 saw us attempt to refine a scoring methodology. We wanted a tool that could be used with every physiological vital sign. Mental state would become another vital sign, assessed consistently and reliably. Leveraging off the widely validated Clinical Global Indicator for Improvement, we attempted to match the severity scoring to the existing Children's Early Warning Tool in the hopes that this would resemble a tool that staff are familiar with to simultaneously make training easier and remove obstacles to its use. Version 3 also saw our graded response or escalation template. Designed to mirror the same instructions found in the physiologic tools, lower scores necessitate local responses, moderate scores result in a more frequent observation and notification to other teams, higher scores get a rapid response. Quite literally, high scores of over 8 or one of the single triggers would require activation of the rapid response teams. Convinced we had a great tool in hand, we went back to a focus group of bedside nurses of varying levels and experience. This failed immediately. What you can't see on the slideshow is this tool was a 4-page document with an accompanying explanatory document that was just not practical for bedside clinicians. So channeling our inner Edison in thinking, I haven't failed, I've just learned how not to do it, we went back to the beginning. I won't say we went back to the start. We had gained a lot of information and experience, but we were back to the beginning. We asked ourselves, what are we wanting to achieve? Our answer, we want every clinician to be able to recognize change and escalate those concerns. We don't need every clinician to be a master diagnostician. It would be impossible to achieve anyway. We do want open, transparent communication about mental state. We do want mental state to be assessed as a vital sign with the same rigor, governance, and response mechanisms as physiologic deterioration. We want every clinician to be able to achieve this without being overburdened. In 2015, the Adult Early Warning Tool in Queensland, the QADS, added in the new onset confusion or agitation marker. This was intended as an alert for sepsis-related changes like delirium, but it was not embedded in other early warning scores like CUTE and the maternity tool QMUTE. Through various committees and groups, we began to talk about what this idea would look like across the lifespan, pediatric, maternity, and adult. Was there something we could do that would be consistent across the state? Queensland is currently 15 digital sites and over 100 paper-based sites, split into 16 hospital and health service groups. Consensus is not easy. This is our current proposal. Within the standard vital sign sets, the AVPU tool already exists. And whilst the AVPU is primarily a tool of consciousness, it is a tool of brain end organ function. We've structured this tool this way for a few reasons. First, keeping the AVPU components together keeps the recognition of the tool and its associated validations. This structure aligns with other assessments such as the agitation and sedation scale, which has positive scales of agitation, normal, 0, and negative scales of sedation. And whilst this is new for pediatrics, it will leverage off the new onset confusion agitation usage in adults, which has shown a great uptake. The terminology is a result of collaboration from acute care, mental health, and community clinicians. We recognise that it's not perfect. It doesn't completely describe our goal. We know that this tool is not diagnostic. It is not a refined, validated, complete tool. But what this tool is a patient starter. By allocating a score of 4, when a clinician identifies, or a patient or parent or carer reports a change in behaviour, the clinician is required to discuss this change with their team leader and the treating medical team. When we start the discussion, we can talk about how we can help this patient. We have also initiated a hierarchy of probable cause to guide clinicians in their investigation, requiring that behaviours related to a child being in an abnormal environment, medication effect and side effect are investigated and potentially treated first. Organic causes like delirium, encephalopathy, seizures and stroke should be considered, and if all organic causes are excluded, then a referral to an acute psychiatric service is warranted. What this tool is a start. When we start to see mental health as another vital sign, with the same importance as tachycardia, hypertension and desaturation, we can start to change the culture and the stigma. We recognise the biggest change in this practice with our proposal will be education. We're only just starting to train our staff about what is mental state. We are working from the updated Gaskin literature review, and the guide you can see on screen is embedded into the early warning score tools so that it's always present to remind the staff on what is deterioration of a person's mental state, or in our vernacular, what is changing behaviour. So what's next? In 2 days, the Queensland statewide RRAD committee meets to endorse this proposal. If successful, we hope to see a rollout to the paper sites and a heuristic evaluation to see if this tool is going to work. And then it's a process of continuous review and refinement as our understanding and our evidence grows. A huge thank you to the team here at the Australian Commission on Safety and Quality in Healthcare for inviting me to talk today, and a big thank you to the other presenters. I'm pretty sure I'm over my time limit, so I'll just say many that has been my privilege to present on their behalf. For their time, their expertise and their opinion, I am truly grateful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Casey. I think that presentation will be very thought-provoking for a lot of people. The work that your team did, and then letting go of work when it's proving not useful, and reframing and moving on. That's incredibly valuable to report. So thank you very much for that. And you know, we really look forward to seeing how this works in the evaluation. It's very interesting that the work is being taken up statewide, and so I think a lot of people are going to be very interested to follow, and will follow alongside them. So thank you very much. We'll now move to our second speaker, Heather Novak, who has been a consumer of mental health services for 35 years, has been a peer worker, has developed peer network education and delivered that education as a lecturer, has been a member of the National Mental Health Consumer and Carer Forum, and in 2019 was appointed as a commissioner in South Australia's Mental Health Commission. Thank you, Heather.
Thanks, Andrew. I'd just like to acknowledge that I meet on the lands of the Paramount people today, and just try and get my screen up for you. And that, oops. Sorry, I'm trying to get rid of myself. Okie doke, so everyone can see the screen, yes? So I'm actually going to provide a bit of a consumer perspective today, and while it might seem blatantly obvious, I think sometimes we forget when we become so focused on mental illness. Okay, so what you're looking at is what I often show people when I'm first talking to them about mental illness, and I ask them what they can see, and the majority of people will say, I see a black dot. So if we're thinking about the black dot in terms of the person's mental illness, and we're so trained to focus in on that and to look at the signs and the symptoms and the things that we're seeing, we often forget to see what's behind it. And if we change our focus, and we may actually realise that what we're looking at is a white page with a black dot on it. So what I wanted to talk about is just the person as a human coming in with a mental illness into an acute facility. That actual mental illness is an exacerbation of a whole lot of things, but often it's a culmination of things that sit behind them in a person's human world. For example, they could come to you having had relationship issues, so poor family relationships, marriage breakdown, those types of things, isolation, being lonely. They could come with work issues, so something may have happened in the workplace that has actually contributed to this exacerbation of their illness. They could come with past trauma and triggers to that trauma. They could have experienced grief and loss, having lost a pet, lost a person. They may even be worried about a pet being home and then being in hospital and not knowing who's going to care for that pet. They could have physical health issues, so they could come with pain or some sort of symptoms that they've been concerned about. And stigma, so they come with perceived stigma, and that can have been through just messages that they've got from other people about having a mental illness and what that feels like, having been judged, having been shamed, and maybe even having experienced services before and not having very positive outcomes from them. And they may even present with financial issues. But if we're so focused and we're so skilled at looking at mental illness, often we forget about the rest of the issues that's brought a person into a facility. So some of the possible causes of deterioration. So if we're thinking about a person in their hospital bed and we're sort of managing their mental illness, and then things sort of change a little bit for them, as a consumer, there's some things that tend to be common amongst people's difficulty and the reason that their mental illness can become and they can become distressed. Firstly, the environment. So being in a different environment, having lots of lights, even being in a locked facility or a locked ward can be quite threatening. Too much time to think. So suddenly you're in the outside world having all of these issues, coming into hospital, and suddenly you've got on top of your mental illness a little bit, and suddenly all those external factors that I've just talked about start to intrude in your thinking, and you can become very ruminated on those things. Having reduced interaction with staff. So when you first come into hospital, you have quite a bit of attention. You have people coming and going all the time and talking to you about what's going to happen. And then over time, that drops off a little bit. And so you tend not to have that interaction and those conversations as much. Medication side effects. Obviously, medication can have multiple side effects, and that can actually cause deterioration. And the other thing that in terms of external environment is intruding phone calls and visitors. So people coming in to see you and talking about those external things can actually trigger that for you and create a deterioration. So what is helpful? So we've talked about clinical tools, things that clinicians can use as checklists and being able to observe what they can see here. But the most important thing for a consumer is around communication. It's around developing a connection and a relationship, being able for someone to use the right words at the right time with the right body language. So it's not just about having a conversation, it's about doing it in a very special way. One of the things that peer workers do really well is that they have an innate knowledge of how to actually have these conversations. And so we assume as consumers that everybody can. But I think what I've learned over time is that it's a bit of an art form. And if you don't know what it feels like, sometimes it's difficult to be able to preempt some of that stuff and have a conversation in a way that people feel that you understand. And you also can be sometimes frightened of the answers that you're going to get as well. So why don't consumers always communicate what their needs are? Why don't they always tell you what's going on for them and why things might be getting worse and they don't let you know? Firstly, I think the trust. So people think that clinical staff are the experts and that they have all the knowledge and that they're going to know what to do. So they almost think that you can read their minds and be able to preempt what they want. They also have a fear of being judged. So if I was to share something that I was concerned about, I may be fearful of the reaction that I might get, so the response that might come with that, which might be more medication or isolation or some of those types of things. Or it might be just fear of the fact that people might think I'm just even a little bit more crazy than I am. Also the lack of opportunity. So sometimes even though you're surrounded by people, you can feel incredibly alone if those people don't interact with you. And so therefore you feel like you've got missed opportunity in being able to talk to people. Often you can feel too overwhelmed. You're just feeling completely lost by the whole size of the issue and not knowing how to actually communicate that. And at times you may actually not know what's actually causing the distress or the escalation. So there's lots of opportunities for clinical staff and other people to actually check in with people to see how they're going. And I think if we're looking at external factors that sort of come into a person's space when they're in hospital, some of those things can be after visitors and phone calls. So after talking to someone on the phone or someone coming to visit, sometimes that can cause some sort of distress by remembering what we've left behind and we haven't brought into that environment. Interactions with other patients. It's one thing that people say is really difficult when you're suddenly in a place and space with a whole lot of people who are strangers to you, who often say things that might not be helpful because they're unwell themselves, and that can actually cause triggers for that person as well. I actually remember a conversation that I had with a nurse it was in a regular hospital, so it wasn't in a mental health facility. And this nurse came in to me and she said to me, "Is there anything in this room that you are thinking about a lot?" And I had to share with her that there was actually a shaver that had been left in the men's bathroom, and I had an adjoining bathroom to this space. And I told her that this shaver was really bothering me, and she went and took the shaver and she removed it. And to me, that was just like, I can't even tell you what a relief that was to know that my mind didn't have to fixate on that shaver anymore, because that's what it was doing. It was just constantly ruminating about what I would do with the shaver and actually just taking up so much of my brain space and causing me distress. That just by that simple thing that she did was just so helpful. So it's important to look at how we engage with people too. I don't think it's just about walking past and going, "How are you going?" or "Is there anything that's different for you?" It's about using empathy. So remembering what it's like to feel human. Remembering what it's like to feel really vulnerable and be in a space where you feel less powerful, judged, and not being able to speak up. It's about making eye contact with the person, so making sure that you look like you really want to listen and you want to engage with the person. Sitting alongside rather than standing at the end of the bed and speaking to, which suggests a whole power imbalance and people feel quite threatened and not able to speak. About preempting needs. So thinking ahead about if you were that person lying there, what might be some things that might be helpful. But people that don't want to express how they feel, and often it's a difficult thing to talk, even putting a notebook and letting people record things in the notebook of changes that they may note about themselves, And of course, remembering to actually check the notebook. There's no point giving a person a notebook and not actually ever coming along to look at it. Reading between the words. People don't speak the same language. We don't speak a clinical language. So learning to hear what people are saying on a different level. Using open body language. So making sure that you look like you're wanting to engage, that you're actually wanting to hear. Making sure that if you promise something that you make sure it happens. People who are lying in a bed have a lot of time to think, and they often come from backgrounds of being having difficult relationships, experiencing pain, and it just makes it really difficult. If they're sitting there thinking that you've promised to deliver something and it doesn't happen, it causes distress. Creating distraction or offering distraction for people who are ruminating constantly. Making sure that there's really good handover. So if there is an issue that you hear from someone, making sure that that is handed over to someone else so that it doesn't get lost. And ensuring that there's a whole team approach. So there's no point having one person in a team that has really good communication. It's about developing that connection and communication right across the whole team. And I think these kinds of things, yes, tools are really helpful, but if we can't have the conversation with the tool and we can't get the person to actually speak up when there are changes happening for them, to let staff know at an early stage, then that's when things escalate and things get worse. So thank you very much. I hope that's helpful. I know it sounds like I'm stating the obvious, but I don't know how many times I often felt in many of those situations that I just didn't have a voice or couldn't have a voice or didn't matter. So, and as a result of that, you know, had increased stress.
Heather, thank you very much for that talk. Very, very helpful. And I learned some things from it, and I've been around this space for 25 years. So while some of what you state is obvious, there's always stuff to learn. So thank you very much for that. Certainly the notions around something that was new to me was that recognition of how you get all of this attention when you come in and then it drops off. And then you're left potentially to ruminate. That was very, very helpful. I also think you confirmed a thing that often comes up for us, which is what are the skills of general nurses and what can we expect of general nurses? And the story you told, sharing with us about the acuity of that nurse and checking with you what's in your mind, and then, you know, there was something in your mind and that person then was able to fix it. That just, they may have had mental health training, they may have been using their skills as a human, who knows, but to me it's a testament to the skill of that person, but also your capacity to then trust and speak up, which is at the key of what you're talking about. So thank you very, very much for that. I didn't mention when I was introducing you that the Commission's been lucky enough to have you as a member of our mental health advisory group since 2015. And yeah, we've benefited from learning over the years this kind of stuff you can teach us. We'll probably have to get you back at some point to talk more about peer work because you touched on it, and I know you've done a lot of work in this area. So, and I think that there's more to learn about. You know, there's still a lot of places that are in the infancy with their peer worker processes and models, and we see a lot of different ones. So it'll be great. We'll probably just get you back.
Thanks, Andrew.
Okay, our third speaker today is Eileen McDonald, and Eileen is also a person who we're lucky enough to have had on our mental health advisory group since 2015. Eileen is also the Deputy Chair of the Commission's Digital Mental Health Advisory Group, that worked on developing the digital mental health standards that came out in 2020. Eileen is an executive carer representative on the National Mental Health Carers and Consumers Forum, and participated as a researcher in the Delphi process on the Gaskin research that, that so many of us have found useful. So Eileen's also been the carer representative on the nation's Safety and Quality Partnership Standing Committee for many years that gives messages up to health ministers. So it's a great pleasure to have Eileen speak today.
Thank you, Andrew. Just give me a moment. I'm not actually screen sharing, except with myself so I can read what I put together. I don't have a PowerPoint today. I do want to thank the Commission for continuing this process of working on the essential elements for recognizing and responding to deterioration in a person's mental state. I was on the original research team for the original scoping project, and very often when you work on those kind of projects, they sit on a shelf somewhere in government. So it's been really, really valuable that the Commission has taken up an ongoing process of continued research, development, consultation, including consumers and carers very extensively, not just a tokenistic one or two of us, but quite a few across the country, and working on the continued demand for various tools. So I'd like to acknowledge the Gundungurra people and their elders, the traditional custodians of the lands of the Wingecarribee Shire where I am today, and I acknowledge the lived experience of all health consumers and their family, friends, and carers. Some of what I was going to talk about has already been brought out by the other two speakers very eloquently, so I don't think I need to go through definitions and things like that. And also I think that the kind of communication skills and other things and learnings from the other two presentations are so practical and valuable. So I'm approaching this from a slightly different place. I'm a consumer myself, a health consumer, a mental health consumer, but my presentation today is something that everyone can relate to. We're all in relationship to someone. Whether we care about them or not, that might be a different story, but we're all in relationship to someone. And whether they're family, family of choice, friends, community, kin. And so experiencing deterioration in anyone's mental state will be distressing for that person, but whether it's their first experience or it's a reoccurrence. It's also distressing for their family, friends, and their community members. And one of the things that highly informs how people express distress and deterioration will be their own culture, their own cultural values, their own beliefs about health or illness. And one of the things that highly informs how it's viewed, how it's kept track of, whether it's taken seriously or not, will be the values and the experience and the cultural viewpoints and beliefs of the various clinicians and persons that are working with that person in whatever environment they are in. So that will inform whether something's escalated, whether it's even recognized as distress, because every culture does it different. And as was mentioned by our first speaker, depends developmentally where you're at. So if we look at the whole of a person, as was mentioned before, and there's other aspects that we have to consider besides someone's age or their developmental abilities, their cognitive intellectual abilities, their communication skills. It's also the lens they might have on life. Maybe it's a spiritual lens, maybe it's an authoritarian lens. And when we mismatch our lens with their lens, it's not just words and language and a tick box chart. In addition, to the kind of influences that Heather mentioned, particularly in the trauma and the distress that are just normal determinants of life in most people's lives. And we don't want to pathologize distress. We don't want to go looking under every pillowcase thinking, oh no, what is contributing right this second? Instead, we want to be looking at a person and relating to a person as a relationship. Now, in a medical setting, it is always a power difference, and that was mentioned before. And I personally have found it very disempowering, whether I'm the patient or whether I'm the family member, when you have no say over your own body, over what your own schedule might be or the circumstances you're in. It's very disempowering. It's very disorienting. Whereas for staff, it's their normal because they have their routines and their schedule. But for anyone coming into any acute health setting, it's automatically going to be a time of anxiety and distress, and that's just part of life. It's how it's managed. It's how it's managed by the staff. It's how it's managed by the person. And very importantly, the family, the friend, whoever's come in with them, or maybe they come later, or maybe they're in another state and they're contacted on the phone or digitally, how they're coping with it all. So there's that kind of influence that can influence escalation or deterioration. How do we know what's normal? Sometimes a person can tell you what's normal. I have friends who say it's just setting on a washing machine. Each person's uniqueness is their uniqueness, their cultural and developmental appropriateness for them. But having what's called in medical terms a baseline and realizing, okay, these are the changes, that's where family and friends are so valuable. But the thing we resoundingly found in all the research starting back in 2012 and 13, when that first report was worked on, all the way through, and it's still reported, is that the family and friends of anyone who's a patient, particularly where there's mental health concerns, feel marginalized and not listened to. Fortunately, there has been greater recognition of delirium and how to treat that, and greatly improved skills. And in different pockets of absolute excellence, I know of one health district in New South Wales that has truly implemented where the patients are involved in the handover, every single handover. And if the family's there at the time, they're involved as well. What they say is noted, so there's this consistency there. Things that might be distressing that have nothing to do with the physical health of the person, or indeed a mental health state, but have to do with the trauma of a previous experience in life or a previous medical experience. And so looking at them through the normal kinds of expectations that this is a person. This is a person in relationships. One of the things Maya Angelou said in the United States many years ago was people won't remember what you say necessarily, but they'll remember how you make them feel. So it's not just what is asked, when it's asked, but how it's asked. And Heather gave an excellent description. I know for myself, as being a carer with more than one family member with very serious mental health issues, and also family members with disability issues, and previously age and other deteriorating conditions with age, including dementia, that I've experienced different reactions in acute settings, often depending on why the person's come in the first place. Why are they there? And so if you have the combination of somebody who's in distress, they're in pain, and they're not able to clearly say why they're in pain and where it is, but even if they are, such as the time when my family member had very clear abdominal pain that wasn't in the part of the body that would probably be appendix, And for that family member, it couldn't be appendix because it had already been removed. And because they were young, and because just looking at their chart of medications they're on, the staff could see, oh, they have a mental health condition. They weren't taken seriously. They were going to be given Panadol and told to go home. And I was treated as the over-anxious parent. And so those kind of biases were there. However, I stayed my ground and insisted for my teenager at that time that we see a more senior clinician, and basically we refused to leave until we did. And they wanted to clear the bed, so they did bring the clinician. The clinician checked through and then very much ordered the right tests and found out there was a very serious physical condition going on. And when I asked later on, why wasn't it taken seriously before? And I was given the excuse that that clinician was on their first rounds of working with pediatrics, so therefore they didn't know how to recognize it in a younger person as opposed to an older person. And yes, there's human error in anything that can happen. I get that. But what I remember most from that was how it made me feel, disempowered, treated as if I'm the problem. And for my teenager, who was now almost a young adult at that stage, they didn't particularly appreciate the way they weren't listened to either. So I think the very practical skills that Heather ran through before, in terms of, it's not rocket science here. I know we're speaking to the converted for many of you. And if we're looking at mood, behavior, orientation, judgment, memory, problem solving, contact with reality, and just trying to figure out what's changing, the people who know the patient will know the most, the nuances and the subtle signs, and very often not the overt stuff that might be looked for. How can we expect clinicians that are run off their feet and understaffed to have a good enough relationship with each patient to really understand what's going on? Well, the best way is collaboration, not just with other staff members, not just looking at notes, because mistakes can be made anywhere along the line, but also a collaborative communication with the family, friend carers that are involved. And even if that might mean a phone call to say, this is what we're seeing. Have you seen that before? What would you do? What would you usually do? So a more strength-based approach, I guess you could say, is what's helped before if this has happened before, not just from a negative space. Family and close supportive caring friends will always have a key role and always be able to identify very early any changes in someone's condition. And I know this mistake was made with me after my second child was born, where my over-the-top exuberance, when I actually was pretty wiped out from the birth process, was not recognized as an early stage of postnatal depression because it wasn't presenting as depression, it was presenting in a very high state. So there's all those kind of overlays that may not ever get recognized if we're only just looking to a tool. A chart is a chart at the end of the day, just like a program is a program, and it's humans, it's people. So I think effective handover processes that include the patient with great respect, as well as any input that can be included by the patient's family and friends. In the medical sector, it doesn't need recognition from the patient. I look at the signs that are up in my hospital and the signs all over the place for the REACH program that are telling everyone, if you are concerned, speak up and keep speaking up. Most carers don't know that they're carers. So any sign that's going to say you're a carer, or any person who's asked, who is your carer? Most people won't relate to that language. But if you ask who's supportive of you, who are the essential people in your life? Most people live with somebody else, or they're the neighbor of somebody else, or they're the friend of somebody else. We relate to people in a relationship, and that crosses all cultures and all age groups. So I'd like to encourage everyone watching this webinar to consider, when they're doing their scoping, their mapping, their researching, their consultations, include consumers and family carers in that process. Not the most unwell ones that you're currently dealing with, but the ones who are already well skilled in how to present the needs and advocate for the needs of other consumers and carers. Most health systems do have consumer and community participation programs and a group of people who are ready to give you what would the community say about this? What would patients say? The peak bodies in every jurisdiction that have very active consumers and carers in health and mental health, and the peak bodies nationally that have that. They are very skilled consumer and care researchers, peer workers, as was mentioned before. We're coming from our lived experience as consumers and carers. And so we can bring the views of not just our own personal experience, but the wider view of those that we are networking with, so that we can represent them for systemic change. So let us be part of these systemic changes with you. Thank you very much for listening to me today and for attending the webinar. And thank you to the Commission for the privilege of participating.
Thank you, Eileen. Many of us have had the good fortune to hear your measured words over the years, and again today I'm glad we were able to share that with a broader audience. I think we could all learn that the idea of lenses, I think, is a really helpful one, that we're mismatching our lenses when sometimes we are interacting with people. One of the things too that I noticed came up in both Heather and Eileen's talks was the idea of handover and the idea of collaboration. So Eileen, you specified that the collaboration is not just between clinicians, and that's a really key thing. So I think we can learn a lot about, so there's got to be good handover. It's not good enough just to have one person who picks something up and works even well with the person. That's got to be across the team. And Eileen, you expressed very clearly that one of the ways that we can make handover better is involving the person who's receiving care, and when they're available, obviously if the person, with the person's permission, family members and carers and other support people. And you know, the other thing that I really liked in that talk, and there's so many things, but that idea that there are improvements. Some of this stuff has led to change. So where carers have reported feeling marginalised and not listened to, and then there are places where you called it a pocket of excellence. And you know, I hope that we can all be optimistic and understand that these pockets are probably everywhere. So the work that people have put in, the work that people like Heather and Eileen have put in over the years, the work that Casey and John and Emily have done, there are improvements. It's great to kind of get that sense of, yes, this is worth something, because it improves for the person who's receiving care, and it will improve for people in the future as well. So we're very, very grateful for that. And look, the Commission separately is doing work on transitions of care, and today's talks have made me think, you know, we'll definitely go back and look at that. Yeah, so questions from, we've had a few questions.
Yep, and one's just come through. I'll read it out. One is, how do you determine the baseline for changing behaviour? such as instances like in emergency where there may not be anyone familiar with what the patient's normal behaviour is, especially in changing shifts where there might be new staff that may not know what normal behaviour was for the patient 2 hours ago. So I guess it comes into the handover that you just talked about, Andrew.
Yeah. And I mean, I think, Eileen, you pointed out that baseline is a kind of medical term and normal is a setting on the washing machine. You know, we do need to be able to generalise, but I think it brings it back to engagement, doesn't it? It's you need to have engaged with the person and with their family and carers. You know, I think that a lot of us have experienced, you know, the normative lens, and I think I can't remember who used the term bias, but you know, we do all have biases and tend towards a kind of normative lens that possibly doesn't suit anybody. So it's back to what is happening for this person. How can you develop the trust? How can you engage with them so that they'll be able to tell you what's happening? You know, and I mean, I know Heather did mention that at times we all find ourselves and the person in receiving mental health care may not know, you know, and we have to be able to bring our human skills and our expertise to that situation. But there will, of course, be many times that we can correct our own bias by checking with the person, and they will be able to tell us, and checking with the family, and they will be able to tell us. So, yes. Now we're running very short on time.
Got one last question.
One last question, okay.
Is there any tips for people that, for staff who are not having mental health training to engage and respond to consumers that may have a mental health challenge? So yeah, during that phone interaction, are there any tips for recognising?
So this is a newish part of health, where health is being delivered through new technologies. So we have had telephone for a while, video conferencing, and now we're getting digital services as well. I'm not sure if any of the speakers would like to address that question.
I think it's been said very clearly by Heather and other speakers that if we approach each individual person as if it was us, how would I want to be treated? What would I want to be asked? That is a good start for any relationship, any interaction. Observing from behind a wall, a window, at the end of a bed is not going to give you the information of actually speaking with a person and seeing them as a person, not as a diagnosis, not as a name on a wall. Obviously, if somebody is presenting behaviors that make it too risky to do that, or they are in a substance-induced state, which could also be from the medications being used to treat people for pain and other reasons that make it difficult for communication. I think of times when I've had family members with serious head injury from playing football, and they became somebody who was usually really mild-mannered was absolutely wild. Well, there was no way at that point anyone could say, gee, what would be helpful for you right now? What do you need? Okay, so that clinical judgment and expertise have to be used, of course. But the bottom line is we're all humans, we're all individuals, we're all persons. And in this day of technology, just like clinicians can very quickly ring somebody else, go on the computer and look up somebody else, whatever, the same thing can be said for reaching that person's family or friend and saying, what do you usually do in this situation or what helps them?
Just further to that, Eileen, too, I think validation really helps. So whilst you might not be, the person might not be able to tell you what is helpful, just validating that you've noticed their distress and that you are concerned for them, and you know, if they can explain what's going on for them, I think is really helpful, and it helps create that relationship and that willingness to share information because you've actually noticed something and you've actually spoken about it.
Okay, now I'm aware of time. Thank you very much to Heather, Eileen and Casey today, to Emily and Jackie and John last week. I have to thank my colleague Angela Kim, who you might have all seen her emails, who has just been technologically marvellous in putting these webinars together with some help from another colleague, Rebecca Peters. So thank you very much to our team here. This will be an ongoing conversation. Eileen pointed out that we've been at it for a few years and we will keep going. I said I'd haunt last week's speakers, so please get in touch, email us if you want to hear more, if you want to hear different things, let us know, because this is a great way to reach people and share knowledge. So we will do some more. If you want to present work, please get in touch. But yeah, thank you very much for everybody today, and we'll see you again.